Hola. That's about all I've learned since I've been here. Mi llamo Schneems. My name is Richard Schneeman. I go by Schneems on the internet. A lot of people have a difficult time pronouncing this. I say it's kind of like Schnauzer or Schnapps. Some people think that's a little bit easier. So I really absolutely love Ruby. As a matter of fact, I'm marrying her at the end of April. One day she asked me, would I still love her if her name was Python? I was like, eh. So I have a dog. This is why I like coming in presenting at conferences, because I get to show people pictures of my dog. His name is Hans Peter von Wolf. It's a long name because he's a long dog. Makes sense. You might recognize me from such gems as Sextant. If you don't like running rake routes, I know I don't. This puts your routes into your browser. It's also going to be standard on Rails 4. So check that out. Thank you. Also have a gem called Wicked for building step-by-step controller wizards. It's fun. I just like the little logo that I made. Anyway. And most recently, I've come out with a project that allows people to get more involved with open source. It's called codetriage.com. You can actually go there right now, and if you're interested in helping a repository out, say like Rails, you can subscribe to Rails/Rails, and you'll get an issue in your inbox every day, one open GitHub issue. So if you don't know where to start getting involved in open source, it's not a bad place. I recommend it. Go to codetriage.com. So a little bit more about me. I'm a professor from the University of Texas, which is really fun. It also means that I get to say good news, everyone, if you have any Futurama fans in the audience. If you know anybody who's learning Rails, I have about 40 hours of videos, exercises, tutorials on schneems.com/utrails. So you can check that out. All right, well, I work for Heroku. So unfortunately, I can't wear this shirt. And I'm very, very happy to be in Uruguay. This is the first time I've been in South America. But when I was making the slide, I realized like we're going over the equator, so we're actually like upside down now. So I wasn't sure which way would be the right way to show that. Okay. All right, so right now, almost everybody's laptops are closed, which is incredible. But please close your laptops. I've flown a very long way to be here to talk about Ruby. Unless you are subscribing to codetriage.com or currently triaging Rails/Rails issues. That's the caveat. Okay, so we've all been in a scenario where we're looking at a new code base, or we're talking to a developer and they're like, oh yeah, that comment, that it doesn't apply anymore. Or they're like, I have no idea how this whole system works, but like, hey, it does. So like, don't touch it. Or yeah, come on. Everybody is like, docs? Who needs docs, right? Like, we're Rubyists. The source code is the documentation, right? Well, that's not entirely always the case, or not 100% always the case. So I wanted to give you all some tools to be able to get into really large or unfamiliar code bases and move around, navigate around, actually figure out what's going on, and be able to, at the end of the day, figure out, well, how to do what you want to do. So, okay, the first thing we're going to be doing is just getting into the code base. This is going to be a little light on the content. We're going to get into some Ruby code in just a little bit. Bear with me. Bundle open. It's the most amazing command ever. I love it. I can just run, if I'm in a project that has a gem file, I can run bundle open wicked, and bam, it will open up my wicked gem, which is like, I don't have to like search around in the path. It's like, it's right there. And even better is if I modify this file, and then I run my Rails project or run my Ruby project or whatever, it's actually running the modified file. So I can just go ahead and modify it on disk right there. Also, a side note, in order to do this, you do have to set your editor. You can export it in your bashrc file, and you just do like export editor equals. Recently I've been trying out MacVim, which is kind of fun, but it's kind of a little insane if you're not into Vim. So Sublime subl-w. Okay. All right, so once we're inside of your code base, once you've opened it up, we did the bundle open, then we need to get some info out. There's a ton of fancy debuggers out there, and by a ton, I mean like maybe 2 or 3. There's a couple of fancy debuggers out there. But for this, like all you're going to be needing is puts. We're only going to be using actual Ruby-based Ruby code. We're not going to be doing any bytecode or anything like that. So I thought this was kind of a neat analogy. If you're not familiar with a tracer round, in war, when they came up with these guns that could fire multiple shots in rapid succession, they realized, people don't actually need to aim, they just need to realize where the last shot went. And so they built these bullets that have smoke or light that comes out of them, basically, as they are going. So you can actually see where the bullet is ending up. So instead of spending a ton of time like carefully precision aiming, you can just kind of like see, you just see where it ended up and adjust accordingly. In Ruby, this is our tracer round. This is my tracer round. And to justify that, can you find the output that I put in here? What about now? Okay, a little easier. So anyway, that's my tracer round. All right, now before I get heavy into the Ruby code, I do have a little minor note on notation, especially if anybody is not familiar with comment. It's a very common Ruby notation. So I'm gonna have this something that starts with a capital letter, and then a pound or a dot, and then something else. So the first part, it's either gonna be a class or a module name. The last part is always going to be a method name. So in this case, the method is puts, and in the middle section, if it's a pound, then that means that it is not a class method. That's kind of a weird way to say it, but that's how I think of it. If it's a dot, then it is a class method. So we can, so yes, you can directly call string.new, whereas you cannot actually call kernel hash puts. Like if you do that, it'll just be kernel with puts commented out. Okay, so who uses Ruby 2.0? Anybody? Okay, that's not too bad. 193. All right. What about 187? Okay. So 187 is going to be end of life in June. Might be something you want to kind of watch out for. And a shameless promotion: try out Ruby 2.0 or JRuby on Heroku if you are going to be upgrading. Okay. So now we can get in, we can get info out. Like we got bundle open, we got our tracer round, we got our puts. Let's do some actual Ruby code. So often I'm going to be in a project. Maybe I did bundle open, and I see some like crazy method, and I want to modify it, but I'm not sure exactly where it's used. It might be called in multiple ways in multiple places that I'm not familiar with. The easiest way to get around this, or to see what is calling your methods, is caller. If you haven't used it before, it's pretty useful. So also recommend, if you're not intimately familiar, rubydoc.org is going to have all of your API docs. Though sometimes, like you go there and you read the documentation and you're just like, what is going on? In that case, Stack Overflow kind of has like a secondary set of API docs. So basically, what kernel caller does is it will give you the backtrace. So whenever you get an exception and you're like, oh, here's exactly what my code path went through when this exception happened, we can get that without having to raise an exception. So if you call it, you just do puts caller.inspect, then we're going to get an output that looks something kind of like this. You're going to get the file, you're going to get the file name, you're going to get the line number, and you're going to get the method that was actually called where caller was. So it's pretty useful, pretty mundane. Who's used kernel caller? Anybody? Okay, yeah, good. So we got some hands. Just really useful for inspecting. So that kind of solves the problem of like, where is this being used? Who's actually calling this method? But we have another problem. So we can kind of go back in time, but we want to be able to go forwards in time as well. And we want to say where. So sure, we're in a method now, but this method calls other methods. Where are those actually going to? Where is Ruby looking at for those methods? So I want to just stop for a second and introduce you to like the most super secret class that no one's ever heard of, except like probably half of you have. Okay, the method class. It is one of the most amazing classes. It's also one of the hardest to talk about classes because it's a method class that has methods. I mean, come on. So if you get confused or I get confused on stage, bear with me. All right, so object has a method on it called method, which will produce a method class. So you can just, on any single object, you can call the dot method on it. So here we have a string that's hello world. You call a dot method on it, and it's going to produce a method object. Once you have that object, you can then call dot call on it, and it will run the actual method. So in this case, it's a really roundabout way of just calling dot upcase on our string. I see some nodding heads. I'm going to assume you guys followed me on that one. Okay, so that is just like a brief aside. Here's where I really want to dig in. The problem, if you'll remember, is where is this method coming from? So our method class has a method on it called source location. You might run into a scenario where maybe, okay, here's a Rails project, your user.rb, it's got like 1 billion lines, and in your console, you load up and you instantiate a user, you call user.last, and you call method, you pass in the method that you're looking for, and you can call .source location, and bam, there's your source location. We've got the file that it's located in, and we also have the exact line number that we're looking for. And so you might be like, okay, well, hey, I could probably like just search that, Control F or something, but we'll see in just a little bit how this is going to be really freaking powerful. Okay, so this is an example of something that actually happened when I was working on trying to debug an issue. In Rails, if you use a link to in an email, you have to have a host. You can't just, there's no request associated with sending out emails. So you have to say, oh, this is from example.com. The problem is if you say http://example.com, Rails will put that in there twice. So if you specify the host as http example.com, it'll be http://http://example.com. Which I'm pretty sure no browser in the world would think that is an actually valid URL. So this works, that doesn't. And I wanted to be able to just remove the HTTP and just kind of like let you go on with your life. That makes sense, it's pretty reasonable. But where in the code, Rails is huge. I don't know if you've ever opened up bundle open Rails. If you had, you'll just see a really small file with like a couple of requires. But like bundle open active record or active support, any of those, how does all of that fit together? So in order to do this, I just opened up a mailer and actually called the link to method and found the source location for it. Then we can see that it's, oh, okay, it's in action pack, and I can see the exact file in action pack. I can see the line number. From there, we just do bundle open action pack, and we look at that line number, and here's the method that we're looking for. So link to, and like in this case, a block is not given, so we can enhance that. That's just a way to fit more text on the screen and make it bigger. So this is the chunk of code that we have. And we say, all right, the problem is the URL is wrong. We don't want HTTP twice. We just want it to work like we think it should. So here is where we're outputting the actual HTML escape string. And here is where we are generating the URL. And you say, oh, perfect, URL4. It's just like, it's a Rails method. Like, I know URL4. Like, maybe I've used URL4. And then maybe you do, like, project search for URL4. And then you realize that there are 13 URL4s over 12 files. So 13 URL4s, 12 files. Come on. So like, which one is it, right? You could just, sure, we could open up all of them and put a puts in each of them, or like, maybe this is where you're like, yeah, dude, just use a debugger, come on. But like, okay, well, obviously, you're going to just say, method source location. And yes, that is the answer in this scenario. So we got a tracer around, we got our method source location. And whenever we call that, we're like, okay, action pack a file called URL helper. So we open up that, and we get this nice little URL 4. And here's where you're kind of like, yes, okay, I've got caller, I've got like source location, like the Ruby universe is mine, I can do anything I want. And then you're like, okay, options, blah, 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 super. Wait a second. You know, I can't do source location on super, and I can't do caller, that's not gonna help. So we have to think and say, what does super actually do? So super is going to go back through the ancestors of an object. It's going to look at all of the classes it inherits from, or like modules that are kind of mixed in as these kind of singletons. And the first one that responds to link to, it's going to call. So, sorry, not link to, URL 4. So in order to actually find that out, you might just think like, okay, well, hey, I'll just do self.class.ancestors, which, if you're not familiar with module ancestors, whenever you call it on a class, it will tell you exactly what it inherits from. Okay, so here is just a super simple example of calling .class.ancestors on a string, and you can see that a string inherits from, well, a string, it inherits from comparable as well as object, kernel, and basic objects. It's pretty simple. Like we can kind of wrap your head around this. So if we go back to our actual object that we're looking at, if we puts the ancestors, like, originally I was like, oh yeah, I'll just open up each of those classes and like control F and so obviously, okay, that's not gonna work. So at this point in time, you might be like, all right, that's a lot of Ruby code. So obviously the solution to too much Ruby code is more Ruby code. So I'm going to introduce you into two other methods. So module method defined will see if a method is defined on a class. You can just call, for instance, if we have a string and we call method defined upcase on it, sure, an upcase is a method on a string, so it should return true, right? That's what we got. And then if we call the same thing on 99, which is an integer, you can't upcase a 99, like I've tried. It just doesn't work. So that's going to return false. So that makes sense. The next one is going to be module instance method. Tech support. This is all part of the show, folks. Yeah, do you have another one? This is, okay, this is clicker number 3. Huh? This is why you always test your code. Okay. All right. Well, so if we call instance method on an object, all right. So if we have an instance of an object, so user.new returns an instance. It returns an instance of a user, but user itself is a class. So if we wanted to get the source location of method, we could, for instance, call user.new.method GitHub URL source location. But if we don't want to actually instantiate an object, we can just go ahead and call instance method on the class itself, which is kind of like a neat little shortcut. It's useful, but also it's more typing, surprisingly enough. So okay, what were we looking at? I think we had self.class.ancestors. So if we put that together with those other two methods, we can do something kind of like this, where we pull all of the ancestors and we iterate through each of them, and then we say, all right, well, hey, does this class have a method defined called URL4? If it does, we're going to keep on going. If it doesn't, then it's just going to skip onto the next one. And then once we say, okay, yes, it does have that method, let's find the source location of that method. So whenever we run this, And here's all the code together. Whenever we run this, we get something an output that looks something like this. So a couple of items in action packed. So one of these things is not like the other. I don't know if you have Sesame Street down here. So you take a look at each of them and you say, all right, that one is like the one before it, is like the one before it. Okay, here we go. This is the unique one. This is the only different file, the only different file number. So let's go ahead and let's take a peek in there. All right, at this point in time, we're kind of almost done, I promise, but only kind of. So once you have found that, you want to, you open up the file, you look at the method, you want to verify your caller. Like, it doesn't make any sense just because you saw that this is one of the things that is an ancestor of your original object. You want to verify your caller. So you run this, and you get your tracer, you get your output, bam, it works out. This is exactly the file and the line number you came from. So when we do this, we want to just, now that we've kind of gotten over that super hurdle, we can go back to our original superpowers of caller and source location, and we can just follow the source code. So we keep on going. We've got this another URL for, so we have like nested URL fors. It's pretty epic. And at some point in time, you end up on this like routing route set file, and this is actually where we want to be. At the very end, we are actually the action dispatch HTTP URL URL4 another URL4 is the one that contains the code that actually merges all of the options together and basically takes that host and inserts it into our URL. So at this point in time, we know enough information to actually solve our problem. So success. Come on. Like, I started this with no knowledge of how that worked at all. And using Ruby to kind of go through the, just using Ruby almost to parse Ruby, but not really, like a human readable way, I was able to open up a Rails issue and fix that bug. So now in Rails 4, you can specify hosts with HTTP. Like, it might seem relatively like trivial, but this technique is actually relatively simple to use. And hopefully I've repeated the words caller and source location enough that whenever you walk out of here, you're going to be like, oh man, I've got a problem. I bet I can use caller and source location. So at this point in time, you might be asking me, hey, are there any more other features that like are kind of good for this code introspection and using Ruby to dig into Ruby? So I recommend taking a look into methods as well as instance methods, which is really good. Normally I pass false into instance methods, and then you can actually see the methods on an individual object. Also, it's not always this complex. Like, digging into this unfamiliar source code, this was the hardest example that I could find. This was of kind of like this nested, having to go through multiple iterations of actually kind of digging in and like really dissecting the code. So obviously you are gonna, or hopefully you're saying like, okay, this stuff is kind of cool, or maybe like I already knew about this stuff, but like, what am I actually gonna do? What I ideally hope is that at the end of the day, that you are going to go from a bug reporter to a bug fixer. So if you see a problem in your code, or you say, this doesn't work like I think it should, or I'm not really happy with this interaction, you can use some of these tools, these techniques. Hopefully, if you have any problems or any questions with them, obviously we're going to have questions in just a second, but even if you can't solve the problem yourself, knowing some of this information really helps the API maintainers or whoever's maintaining the code that you're reporting the bugs to. You can also use it to troubleshoot your own code. I don't know if you have written in any projects that have like hundreds of files or files with thousands upon thousands of lines. Sometimes just searching is not enough. And especially whenever you get into all this, okay, we can monkey patch, and like we can monkey patch the monkey patches, and then like now we can like append and prepend modules and all this other stuff. it makes it a lot easier when you can for sure say, I know exactly where this line of code came from. I know exactly where it came from and where it's going, and that really helps to clear up the confusion. Finally, it also helps you to, or at least it helps me to write a little bit more readable code. The more and more I get into this, I hesitate to say this, but I'm slightly more in favor of the kind of like value objects, where if you are using a value object, like it's pretty obvious normally where things are coming from and where things are going. It's not always the right pattern though, but if you're writing really obscure code, as you're writing code, if you're thinking like, man, I would hate to be me searching through this code in like 5 years, well, guess what? You probably will be searching through your own code in like 5 years. So just be aware of that. So to recap, we got source location. It's going to be showing you where you're going. Caller shows you where you've been. I'm going to put my slides up online, and you can get all that source code. Let Ruby show you the way. Ruby's a very powerful, flexible tool. And finally, I think that if you're not familiar, we have Ruby Heroes 2013. I'm not telling you who I'm voting for, but I might ask that, or request that you ask not what bundler can do for you, but what you can do for your bundler maintainer. So Terrence Lee maintains bundler.